Russell Brand and Candace Owens discussing left and right in politics was everything you might have hoped for. In a word, it was sparky, but I think sparky in the right kind of way. Russell was on his cheeky, chappy, cockney geezer charm offensive, and Candace did her fiery, take no prisoners, woman with attitude thing. But actually it reminded me of so many of the fights that I've had with my sisters growing up. I used to love just sort of winding them up, and I think Russell plays big brother to Candace's little sis, and that approach beautifully handles the situation, and it takes what could have been purely oppositional into a really fruitful conversational context. So I thought Russell Brand did a brilliant job in this interview. Therefore, instead of this, like when Candace debated the left-winger Eric Michael Dyson,
using big words here
let me
to say
finish.
nothing.
What you're
Narcissistic.
saying
what are
here.
you saying right
So now what happens to black America happens to you. So black people are reduced to what? Can you?
instead, it was like this.
Comfortable.
We're not leaving until we agree on absolutely everything. Candace. then we'll
so
leave.
I have you in a MAGA hat.
I'm wearing it already, but just down my trousers.
Yeah. Oh, very nice.
There were so many funny moments, and well done, Russell, for making this a truly enjoyable, and I'm going to say it again, sparky conversation. Largely, it was about politics, left and right, and it was titled Populist Revolution, Will It Go Left or Right? So I guess we need to take 1 minute to figure out what left and right wing actually means. Left and right wing derives from the French Revolution, where those to the left of the king supported the revolution and those to the right supported the monarchy. So left has come to mean change, right has come to mean status quo. But also the terms have developed. So left tends to mean liberal and progressive, right means conservative and traditionalist. But liberal with regards to what? What are we liberal about, or progressive about, or conservative about? Generally, those on the left say on ethics, leave me alone, and on economics, let's honour the community. And those on the right say the opposite. On economics, they say leave me alone, and on ethics, they say let's honour the community. And then there are obviously other kinds of ways of thinking about politics. There's libertarians and anarchists who tend to just say, leave me alone, period. But let's just stick with left and right. And as we do so, you'll notice that those who group together under those banners tend to be of similar personality types. Jordan Peterson puts it like this.
A fair bit of your political preference is determined by your biological temperament. It's strongly influenced. So if you're a creative type who's kind of disorderly, then you're likely to be on the liberal left end of the distribution. And if you're a non-creative type who's orderly and especially if you're orderly, then you tend to be on the right wing end of things.
If you're open and disorderly, you go left. If you're orderly but not open, you go right, or you tend to. And these things also break down gender-wise. Women to the left, men to the right, and age-wise. What's the saying? If you are not a liberal when you're 25, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative, by the time you're 35, you have no brain. As people age, they tilt right. It just tends to happen. And these are generalities, obviously. But we can observe these kinds of generalities in the wider population. And as we do so, it really makes me think of the most famous story that Jesus ever told. It might be the most famous story of all time. Really, it's about diagnosing these two kinds of people. But it finishes by telling us that neither type of person is actually the integrated, put-together kind of person that we want. There's left, there's right, and there's something from above. Let me briefly tell you the story. It's in Luke's Gospel, chapter 15. It begins this way. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Tax collectors and sinners were the nonconformists of their day. Tax collectors were white-collar criminals in bed with the hated Romans, and they were thumbing their nose to Jewish identity. The sinners were notorious transgressors, thumbing their nose at Jewish morality. These were the freedom people. But on the other hand, Jesus speaks of the Pharisees and teachers of the law. These guys are not the rule breakers, they are the rule makers. They are into Jewish identity and morality. They are not into ethical freedom, they are into respect, right? And these are two kinds of people in the world, aren't they? There's the freedom people and the respect people. There's the rule breakers and the rule makers. And Jesus comes to planet Earth, and the rule breakers flock to him, interesting, and the rule makers grumble. That's what they do best, I suppose. And what's going to happen? Well, Jesus tells a story. He tells 3 stories actually, but let's zero in on the most famous one. Here goes. In Luke chapter 15 from verse 11, Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. So it's obvious, right? Jesus is surrounded by 2 kinds of people, and so he tells a story about 2 kinds of son, right? And one turns out to be a freedom guy, breaking all the rules, and the other guy turns out to be a respect guy, who grumbles about it. So from verse 12, the younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Younger brother, he is a bit of a scumbag, really. Basically, he says to his dad, Dear Dad, you know all that money that's coming to me when you die? Well, you seem to be taking your time. So either hurry up and die, or give me your stuff now so that I can get as far away from you as I possibly can. Not cool. Verse 13, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. It's kind of the old story. You go for freedom and you end up enslaved. You go for round-the-clock partying and you end up starving. You go for escape and you end up in a pigsty. But, verse 17, when he came to his senses, he said, How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. So here we've got the younger son. He's in the pigsty. He realizes that the freedom project hasn't worked. He's just gotten himself lost. So now he wants to go from being a sinner to being a slave. Did you notice that? He wants to kind of be like the older brother slave type. But his dad will not have it. As we'll see, halfway through verse 20, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Beautiful, right? Here is the welcome of Jesus. He welcomes sinners and eats with them. And that's great. That's the essence of Christianity. We are embraced and brought home not because we are good, but because there is a God who is good and a God who is loving and threw his arms open to rebels. His arms were nailed open for rebels like you and me so that anyone can come home. So that is the welcome of God here in this story. But how does the older brother respond to all this? Well, verse 25, meanwhile the elder son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The elder brother became angry and refused to go in, so his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and have never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me and everything I have is yours, but we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. That's the story Jesus told, one of the most famous stories ever told. And here we have 2 sons, 2 kinds of people. One goes for freedom and gets enslaved. The other goes for respect and ends up furious and shaming the whole family. See, neither son is a true picture of humanity. The younger son lost in the pigsty and the older son lost in self-righteousness. That is the natural state of humanity, whichever way you skew personality-wise. All of us, we all need saving from these 2 ways of being. If you like, we need saving from left and right. And this interview between Russell and Candace points to the way that can happen. I mean, think about Candace. Here's some of her personal history. Think about which brother in Jesus' story she is like.
Well, I think I was always sort of an alien child. Like my mother says all the time when I was a kid, they were just weirded out by me. Like I never cried. They always thought I could like understand them as a baby in the crib, which is really bizarre.
Am I right in thinking that you suffered from anorexia when you
That's
were
correct.
younger?
Yes, I suffered from anorexia for about 4 years. When you starve the body, there's almost a mental clarity that takes over, and that's what I think becomes addicting for most people. Like for me, it was never about weight, and for most people, it's not about weight. It's usually, I mean, when you learn about anorexia, they tell you that it's usually a manifestation of people trying to assert control over their lives. And that's what it is. It's the one thing you can control when you feel like there's chaos is what you put in your mouth and your body.
She's the older brother, right? All about control. When life got hard, Candace went to anorexia, a form of addictive behavior, very different to Russell's drug of choice, right? How did Russell describe his upbringing?
To that, like I grew up in an ordinary household, single parent family. My mum was sick a lot when I was a kid. I had sort of intermittent access with my dad, you know, relatively regular, but like that my parents weren't together. And then I became a crack and heroin addict when I was sort of in my late teens. And
so Russell's drug of choice sounds a lot more like striking out to the far country, right? And Candace's addiction was much more about keeping things in, keeping control, not going off the rails, not a blowout in the far country, but working hard in the field. So given that these are the personality types, Russell asks the key question.
did you get any help?
No, I helped myself, which is crazy, right?
She didn't get help. She helped herself. She went to one counsellor who she didn't think was smart enough, and Candace managed to lift herself out of her own trouble. And now she says that this is what we can all do. Russell very much identifies this as a pull yourself up by your bootstraps philosophy.
So what it seems to me is that you have a tremendous faith in the ability of the individual to create their own destiny.
Correct.
And why wouldn't you? Because you've lived it. But do you think that that's applicable to all individuals?
I think 100%, unless there are, of course, policies in place that are preventing you from doing that. There are not in America at this moment in time.
Did you hear that? From a personal experience to a broader point about politics. It should be about self-help, says Candace. So she says this.
As long as we are provided the same opportunities, which in America, our system is if you work hard and you're willing to work hard, you will be rewarded.
And also this.
And there's all sorts of experience of America.
In America, it is proven that if you make good choices, if you stay out of trouble, if you don't have children out of wedlock, and you have a job, you will...
All right, there's like moral codes.
Yeah, there is, that's it. And you'll be successful, that's it. That's all you have to do. But in the interim, you're in a part of a school system that sells you 1,000 ways that you're being victimized, and people, as opposed to going to work, are wearing pussy hats and protesting a fair and free election.
Notice the little comment by Russell there? There's that moral code, he says. I mean, spoken like a true younger brother, okay? The older brother says, you're a self-made individual. The younger brother says, that smacks of moralistic self-righteousness. And what about those who just can't do it? That's the concern of the younger brother. Well, where the right highlights the individual, those on the left look for broader explanations for why people might have found themselves in the position that they're in. And if you're not prospering in the world, it might not be because you're lazy. There might be systemic problems, racism, sexism, homophobia, other kinds of prejudice and social factors.
But for me to deny that there is an impact of social, economic and historic conditions on the individual experience of people, and and those conditions are not affected by race, for me, I don't think that's true, Candace.
No,
and Russell makes the excellent point that even your get up and go drive, Candace, you did not give that to yourself. You got lucky.
Even having drive and the willingness to work hard is in itself an endowment.
Russell's point to Candace is your self-determination was not self-determined. It was a gift, an endowment. As the New Testament says, what do you have that you were not given? And so here we are at the nub of an issue. It's a totally decent issue to wrestle over. There is a sense in which I ought to be considered as a grown-up, an individual who can stand on his own 2 feet, and I shouldn't be babied. If I'm to grow up to my full stature as a person, I should be expected to forge my way in the world. Okay, that's true, but at the same time, I need help. You know, in the Cain and Abel story in the Old Testament, the murderer Cain asks the question, am I my brother's keeper? And the right answer to that question is yes, you are your brother's keeper, and you should look out for your brothers and sisters and give them a hand up whenever they need it. So this is a totally legitimate problem to wrestle with, right? The individualism and the need for help. The trouble is, the left can take a one-size-fits-all answer to the question, and the right does similarly. So there are dangers. On the left, there's the danger of idolizing the victim. That's when we say to everyone, look, the reason you are not where you want to be in life is because of other people and faceless systems, and you're a victim. And Candace does a good job of highlighting the dangers of disempowering people with a victim mentality.
Victim mentality. I've seen you talk about this.
Yes.
Now, give us some background on it, because some English people won't know what you mean.
It's just the oppression Olympics. You know, everybody wants to say, I deserve more because I'm more oppressed than you. Oh, okay, well, you might say, I might say that I'm more oppressed than you because I'm black, right? And you're white. So instantly I'm more oppressed and I deserve more and my voice should be louder. And then we say, okay, well, you're a male and I'm a woman. So instantly I deserve even more because I'm a woman and you're a male, and women are more oppressed, which is totally a lie. And I should have my voice heard louder. And then you keep going, gay, straight, and they've created all of these little pockets, and you have to figure out who is the most oppressed person. I guess it would be a disabled, black, female, gay person would probably be the most. If you want to win the oppression Olympics, that's it. And everyone should fawn over you, and everything you say should count and should matter. And it's absolute crap. The victim mentality is what's stopping most people from getting from point A to point B.
One of Christianity's gifts to the world has been to value the victim. Back in the first century, everyone was saying, like in the Gladiator film, strength and honor, strength and honor. But Christianity has God coming to be a sacrificial victim, dying in weakness and shame. And it's this act and this message that turns the world upside down. Christian culture overturns the strength and honor culture of the Romans and builds a culture that cares for the oppressed and the weak and the marginalized, because we believe that God, our God, was crucified in weakness. We stand up for the little guy because our God became the little guy. So Christianity has given to the world a sensitivity to the rights of the weak and the oppressed. But these days in the West, we have divorced that concern for the victim. We've divorced that from every other consideration. We compete to achieve victim status. We all try to be the victim rather than try to become the kinds of people who can help real victims. And that kind of mentality disempowers people and becomes the oppression Olympics. So there is a problem with classifying everyone as a victim, of seeing the problem as simply systems beyond ourselves. But there's also a problem with seeing everyone as captain of their own soul and master of their own fate. Where the left idolizes the victim, the right idolizes meritocracy, the self-made man. Here's Alain de Botton in an excellent TED Talk.
If you really believe in a society where those who merit to get to the top, you'll also, by implication, and in a far more nasty way, believe in a society where those who deserve to get to the bottom also get to the bottom and stay there. In other words, your position in life comes to seem not accidental, but merited and deserved. And that makes failure seem much more crushing. In the Middle Ages, in England, when you met a very poor person, that person would be described as an unfortunate. It's literally someone who had not been blessed by fortune, an unfortunate. Nowadays, particularly in the United States, if you meet someone at the bottom of society, they may unkindly be described as a loser. There's a real difference between an unfortunate and a loser.
Boiling everything down to the individual, to meritocracy, has its dangers. So there's the danger of idolizing the victim, and there's the danger of idolizing the self-made man, meritocracy. Both sides have a point when they highlight the imbalance of the other. Here are two other potential idolatries. The left tends to idolize the state, the right tends to idolize the market. The left idolizes the state. These 2 minutes in the interview were perhaps my favorite 2 minutes from the whole 2 hours.
What do we do in the instance of a young woman or a girl that's suffering from anorexia and doesn't have your drive? What happens in this situation? This is a person, wouldn't you agree, that requires help, compassion, love, support, and who do you propose should provide that?
Hopefully her parents.
What if her parents...
What do you think, the government's going to just create programs for anorexics to go to places? I mean, if an anorexic seeks help, it seeks therapeutical help, then they have to go.
Why would
to a
that be so
therapist.
bad if the government did create...
That's to me, it's ridiculous.
Why
it's
though? Why?
It's so ridiculous. The idea of
but
just
hold on a minute. It just spent trillions on bailing out banks. Why can't we bail out some anorexics?
If we're not bailing out anorexics, it's that
we bailed out the banks.
The government is not God. They are not the solution to all your problems. Families, the community, your friends, things of that nature. People forgot about that whole thing that happened, right? Where like, where's the girl going to go? Does she have parents? Is there anyone you can go to before you start worshiping the government to fix it? What am I going to do? I don't have any money in my account. Is there a government program that will fix it? What am I going to do? I have anorexia. Is there a This is what's wrong with the world. People don't remember life before government was big.
What I'm astonished by is your belief that the government is this sort of friendly, benevolent,
That's
fairy
your belief.
godmother.
You're the one that wants him to grow it.
No, I don't believe in that.
You're the one that thinks
I
there should be
believe that it's a
programs for
draconian
anorexics.
machine,
No,
empowering people, conditioning people.
And yet you want to grow it. You think there should be an
When have I
anorexia department.
I
And then they'll walk around with their binders and they'll do inspections on the
me.
anorexics. Right? Seriously. You do. You're
Listen,
not ideologically
no, I don't
consistent.
agree with that. I don't. That's not what I think. I don't.
Can we abolish the anorexic programs for government we just created?
No,
Strike it from the list.
We're taking.
Strike it from the list.
Your taxes are going up considerably for my cuddly, cozy anorexia program. Then we need a further 10% for little pudding and pie drug addicts that are so down in the dumps that all they can do is take heroin all day long.
I love this so much. It was a glorious conversation. It really was. And beyond the talking points, Candace is raising a question that does need to be asked at some point. Is it possible for government to get too big? Both Candace and Russell seem to think that businesses can get too big, certainly if they are monopolies.
But my concern is that we need to find new ways of curbing the power of big business. I'm not talking about some lovely bloody florist making their way in life or people that are entrepreneurial and
but I
inventive.
agree with you. But
I'm
we
talking
have
about
laws for
massive
that. That
centralised-
is limited
They're
government.
not working.
Google should be broken up. It's a monopoly. I don't agree with monopolies, right? Google is a monopoly. It's a worldwide monopoly. I have said it vocally 1,000 times. Google should be broken up. Amazon is problematic. These are issues that Trump is tackling.
So government should limit businesses, but should anyone limit governments? And how would they do that? In the New Testament, Romans 13 gives honor to the state. It says that the powers that be have their powers from God and that they serve people and that they legitimately bear the sword. That is, the state legitimately has the monopoly of violence. No one else can use force the way that the state can. So there is definitely a legitimate scope for the state. But it's not just that Romans 13 is in the Bible. There's also Revelation 13 at the end of the Bible, which says that the state can become monstrous. The state can overstep its bounds. It is possible. And is it possible that the state is overstepping its bounds now or will do so soon? At that point, there is an idolatry of the state. And Russell seems to acknowledge this.
That's the goal, is to realize that the job of a government wasn't supposed to be to govern every piece of our lives. You know, the government in many ways is trying to replace God. You know, people use.
I do like that idea, and I agree with it, that statism and post-Westphalian Treaty nationalism simply replaced the notion of an omnipotent deity with the state. That's definitely true. Well, according to my little brain.
In the absence of a Christian vision, the left substitutes the state for the church. So the left can idolize the state, but the right can idolize the market. It was Adam Smith who described the workings of free market economies in The Wealth of Nations, and he saw that, amazingly, there was, as he called it, an invisible hand that directed things. When you allowed people to freely trade, we discovered that prices and quantities were set by the actual supply and demand, and that this invisible hand therefore organized our production far more efficiently certainly than planned economies could. But just as the state can be a substitute church for the left, the invisible hand of the market can be a substitute providence for the right, a substitute God even for the right. And here is Russell waxing eloquent.
I think as human beings we should aspire to greater goals than simply fulfilling a predetermined economic role. But worshipping continually at the altar of finance, we must do better.
You think I worship finance?
We must look for a better solution. I don't know if you do. You believe in God, right? And what is a belief in God if it's not essentially the belief that underneath hatred is love and underneath the individual is oneness, and that what we do to one another we do to ourselves and vice versa? That we need to create systems that are reflective of our benevolence, of our kindness.
That's a
Well,
disagreement. We
go
don't
on,
need
then
to
what
create
is your
system.
belief in God?
If you want to be good and you want to be benevolent, you can exercise that in your personal lives. You and I are discussing politics. What you've done is that you've blended in your mind that politics and goodness and oneness all should go together. Hell No. Okay, there is no such thing as a good government. That's why we want it limited. The idea that government is not going to become corrupt when you exercise these practices of goodness, and that's what they do. They sell to the public.
Listen,
we're going to
Candace,
be good for you, and we're going to extract all of your dollars, and everyone is going to be equally poor.
Incredibly naive thing to say, and I'm startled that you've said it. The reason that they want government to be impeded is because it's easier to make money when there's huge deregulation. That's
Great argument from Russell, then counterpoint from Candace, and then counter-argument from Russell again. Russell frames things very wisely as a matter of worship. And Russell, as a man who reads his Bible and whose higher power from the 12-step program seems to be pretty Jesus-y, pretty Sermon on the Mount-y, really, Russell Brand recognizes that you either worship God or money. Mammon, as Jesus calls it, is a substitute God. And for all that we might claim to want freedom, really we just want money. And Russell says, shouldn't we devote ourselves to kindness and love? And Candace says, well, fine, do that in your personal life, but don't make everyone give at the point of a gun. If the state have the power of the sword, then they can only actually coerce people. They take money at the point of a gun to redistribute it to others. It's theft, she cries. But Russell comes back and says, but Candace, aren't there people who you want the government to curb? What about the banks? What about Google and Amazon? What about monopolies? What about businesses that pursue costs, that pursue profits at the cost of the environment? Doesn't there need to be a sword, a power that is above the market, above the corporation, holding them to account? And actually, they both agree on this point. Yes, there should be. For big business, there should be a power above it. But Russell also wants to say that there needs to be government power to curb individuals in their greed and in their selfishness. First, here he is on individuals in their greed.
Do you not think that economic inequality creates in a human being a sense of injustice, of unfairness? Because people, do you know what, Candace? 90% of people that are rich, do you know why they're rich? They was born rich.
People are born wealthy, and we need to take that wealth from them because, notice, it creates in a human being a sense of injustice and unfairness. I think it's well been said that the characteristic sin of those on the right is greed, and for those on the left, it's envy. Because, let's ask, why is inequality in and of itself a problem? Poverty is definitely a problem, but why is inequality a problem per se? Because it causes envy? Well, again, the power of government is not going to be able to deal with the problem of the human heart, and actually identifying inequality as a problem in itself is only going to inflame envy. But that's the first way that Russell wants to curb government. Or rather, that's the first way that Russell wants the government to curb the individual. He wants the government to curb the individual's greed. He also wants the government to curb our selfishness.
The reason is because people are selfish, and in all of us there is a kind of battle between, like, some of my impulses, Candace, are I just want pleasure and fun, and I don't care about anything except myself. That's in me. Mm-hmm. That's in me, and it's strong. But I personally think I don't feel good when I live that way. There are consequences for me, and there are consequences for others. So I kind of want to live within systems that encourage collective and communal values. That instead
theft. We're talking about theft.
No, we're not talking about
demanding
theft.
That people give up their stuff is theft. But it sounds pretty when you say encourage, incentives. No, when the government comes and demands that I give to someone else, that's theft.
You keep translating what I'm saying.
I'm helping you.
No, you're not helping me.
He's talking about theft.
Russell wants the government to curb his selfishness, and Candace ain't having it. Theft, she cries. And that's the old divide between capitalism and communism, right? The arch-capitalist says taxation is theft, and the arch-communist says property is theft. And Candace is throwing the slogan at Russell. But there is a point behind the slogan. If Russell is worried that we are not loving and self-giving enough, that's definitely a problem. But what's the solution? Coerced charity? That's a funny kind of charity. And surely there does come a point when getting the power of the state to solve the problem of the human heart is wrong, right? I mean, we can disagree about when that line is crossed, but there is a line, isn't there? The government can ensure a rule of law, but it cannot solve the problems of the heart. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "It may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me, and I think that's important." Amen. There is a good and proper use of the sword, enforcing a rule of law, but it cannot enforce a rule of love, can it? Everyone wants a more compassionate society, but how do you enforce it? There was a nice moment in the dialogue.
I agree with you. Yeah, decentralised government. But where I feel you and I are going to disagree is on the level of extending compassion, love.
You want to give out hugs?
Well,
what do you mean? How would you?
Well, no, hold on a minute. You're the
give
guest
out
on this
compassion?
podcast.
Yeah. How would you give
There would
out
be some
compassion?
hugs, yes.
Tell
There would
me.
be some hugs.
There will be some hugs, yes. I love that. I love Russell. Enforced state-sponsored hugs, but hugs nonetheless. And at that point, you see how beautifully utopian his view is. And I use that word utopian advisedly because, of course, the idea of utopian ideals really gets Candace's goat. You can tell that the word utopia just sparks in Candace every 20th century atrocity that ever flew under a utopian banner. This is hilarious.
Utopianism's got to be the aim. You can't be seriously saying that
utopianism should be the aim. Did you
yes,
just
it
say?
should be the aim.
It
should be the aim.
Literally, like that's.
Why? Where else would be the aim?
We're in
hell,
we're
hell on
we're
earth.
in like
Is that
Willy,
what you're trying
we're
to
in
create?
Willy Wonka
A world
land.
where we all
It
hate
can't
each other?
happen. It can't happen. Human beings are always going to be
about
human
aspiration.
beings. Since biblical times,
No,
we're always going to have.
Bible, the point of the Bible is that we will transcend.
No,
that man will transcend. That we can get beyond our primal desires.
Right.
Our primal desires that you're trying to turn into systems. Greed, jealousy, conservatism.
No. It's the opposite. I'm saying you have to acknowledge that this exists. This is why it's foolish when people
You've got to
say,
acknowledge
give
it,
up all of your
but it's
rights to
being
the government. And then what
acknowledged.
happens? What happened to Venezuela when they gave up all the rights and they sold them this utopian concept that Russell Brand loves? And there's going to be flowers in Venezuela and Skittles. And we're all going to go to Willy Wonka every day. Yay! And what happened? Oh, we found out what happens when you give all your money to the government keeps it. That's what they found in Venezuela. Because you know why? Because the government is governed by human beings, and human beings are greedy
So you
and
are negative.
selfish and terrible human
oh
beings.
my God, that's not all they are.
No,
Right,
it's
I
not.
thought this.
But when you give them all of your money, you're going to see what happens, and
So
that is
what's
what
going to
happens
happen?
time
What's going to happen
and
to
time
these
again under
untrammeled
socialism.
individuals, Candace? These untrammeled individuals that have got no regulation. What, they're going to be different from the Venezuelan government?
Limited.
So here we come down to the problem with utopianism. We all want the hugs Russell is speaking about. We all want the programs that help the anorexic and the drug addict, and we want the compassion and the love, and maybe we should have all that, but there's got to be a line somewhere, right? We have a national health service, okay. Do we want a national hugs service? Do we want a national food service? Do we want to nationalize our love lives? All those things are really vital things, right? Food and hugs and love. So we all want a society full of good food and hugs and love, but we all recognize that there are things the state is ill-equipped to offer us. And if the state does take into its hands those things, it enlarges itself inappropriately. At some point, state power becomes like the ring in The Lord of the Rings. It becomes so powerful and all-embracing that it becomes a real question about who is fit to ever wear the ring of power. I mean, you think you're going to be the one who uses the ring of power for good, but this is where the problem with human nature really kicks in. And right here in the discussion, we hit something really fascinating, because Russell's natural instinct about human nature, about whether we're good or evil, his natural instinct is to say, we're good. He's kind of horrified that Candace might think that we're not.
That thing you just said, mate, about like human beings are greedy and cruel and
Components of humanity.
Yeah, but you said that for me, when you said that, I thought that was very telling. I feel that is ultimately what you believe. I think you think human beings are ugly.
No, I don't.
Russell is a younger brother, and his instinct is, hey, life's good, people are good, let's party. But Candace is about to press him, and actually then Russell taps into a deeper answer. Not the instinct of the younger brother. He goes on to answer like the recovering addict he is. He remembers he remembers that he is a younger brother who got lost in a pigsty and had to be rescued. So he gives an answer from the Christian writer, Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
I'll ask you a question. Do you think we're more good or more evil?
Good. I think human beings are beautiful.
Okay, so you think we're born pure and good and wonderful?
No,
you have a small child.
Listen,
right?
as Solzhenitsyn
you
said,
have to teach human beings good.
Listen, the culture is definitely a factor, but this is my point. You've asked me a question. Please allow me to answer it.
Yes, sir.
Solzhenitsyn says the line between good and evil runs not through nations, religions, or creeds, but through every human heart. Because I know that there is darkness in me. Right. I know there is selfishness and greed and like libido, life force, not necessarily a bad thing, but lust, for example. I know all these things exist in me.
This is brilliant. Here's the younger brother who pursued freedom and ended up lost, ensnared by his own darkness, and now he knows the problem is not out there, it's in here. The full quote from Solzhenitsyn is so worth restating. Solzhenitsyn wrote, "If only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them, but the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart?" This is why Russell Brand is able to handle this conversation so well. Not just his quick wit and his cheeky chappy bonhomie. He knows that the other side are not the enemy. They are not the evil ones. It's not left or right or globalists or nationalists or capitalists or communists. It's me, right? I am the problem. He's learnt the power of the darkness within him, and he can't now give a glib answer about the problem with the world. It's not that people are good and my opponents are bad. I'm part of the problem. But then what's the solution to this confession of sin? He says it can't be the market and economics. That's right. And he says it needs to involve a spiritual community. That's right. But what does he mean? It's hard to say.
I need to exist within communities and systems that acknowledge that I am flawed and that I can fail, but encourage the better parts of my nature. For me, that is not a kind of venal, economically driven system that rewards a kind of the pursuit of excess. I don't think we can ever be fulfilled by commodity. I don't think we can ever be fulfilled through acquisition. I think that our goals must become spiritual.
But I agree with that.
I'm not in favour of creating banal Stalinist massacre factories, but I also resent and reject the illusion of a commercial capitalist state where people are being underserved spiritually. People are neglected and cut off, and people are, oh, do you know we're richer than we've ever been, and statistically things are yippee-yi-yay. Well, I live in this world and I feel a lot of dissatisfaction, a lot of pain. I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been in both of those worlds, and I sense that there is a something spiritual that is not being served, that is being neglected, and I feel a huge part of that is living in a world where the supreme ideals are economically driven, where there is a huge unfairness, where we are ignoring the problems of the earth.
When it comes within you.
Russell Brand, come home, your father is calling. And I think you're hearing him too. Come home to the true spiritual community that has spanned the globe and liberated people down through history. It's a community that is not the market, and it's not the state. It is not coerced. There is no power of the sword here. But in this spiritual community, we do truly belong to one another. We do truly preach that underneath hate there is love, and underneath the individual there is oneness. It's a oneness in God that helps us to be our true, irreplaceable, and particular selves. So come home, Russell. Your father is calling. I mean, the father is definitely calling. Russell is a younger brother who has run off to the far country, gotten lost in the pigsty, and actually he has been delivered from that pigsty. The 12-step program, a phenomenally Christian approach, which Russell writes about so beautifully in his book Recovery. That 12-step program has brought him on a journey there and back again, and in this interview we even see him doing something so like the father in the parable that Jesus told. Russell actually appeals to Candace, the elder brother, so to speak, and he preaches a beautiful message of reconciliation to her.
But do you not feel like that you want to receive and give love to people? Is that not sort of high on your agenda as a person?
Of course it is. And I receive so much love, because once people have this political awakening and they realize that everything that's been sold to them is a lie, nothing feels better than self-empowerment.
Oh, Candace, self-empowerment. What comes within you? All this talk of the individual, do we always have to talk about empowering these divided atoms, these individuals? Russell is right to say that ain't love.
But that is not the clearest and most obvious manifestation of love.
To put it mildly. But what is the clearest manifestation of love? Get this.
Don't get angry. What did our Lord do? He forgive them. They know not what they do. Yeah. Forgiveness, endless love.
I do love love.
If you've been put in a position of power, then you have an obligation to be loving. That's your first obligation.
Right.
Not to be all practical, because I don't think you've been given enough love.
So good. He starts with the infinite and forgiving love of Jesus, and he finishes by saying, I don't think you've been given enough love. He knows how to preach to elder brothers. It's heart-melting, isn't it? He has another go at reaching Candace's heart when he asks her why she turned to anorexia.
Why the anorexia?
Well, because I was trying to assert control in my life, and that was the way that I dealt with it. But I mean,
What about other people that have got anorexia? What do you say to them? Buck up!
I wouldn't say that. No,
So
I understand it obviously in the same way that you would understand drug addiction on a more molecular level because you've lived it.
All right.
I would tell them that they need to identify what they're trying to control.
When I'm talking to drug addicts, I say this: somewhere in you do not think that you are beautiful. You have been hurt. There is a way out of this pain,
right?
Through spiritual connection to one another, through service, through higher ideals, to recognize your own beauty and to realize it. That's the sort of thing I have to say to them, right?
Russell realizes it's love that changes. Love woos younger brothers back home. Love melts the hearts of older brothers. But it can't be the love that is enforced by the state. That's not love. And it can't be the love that is simply empowering and individualism. That's not love. But there really was a love that left the Father's house to meet the younger brother types and the older brother types, the lefties and the righties. And he loved us in spite of our goodness and in spite of our badness, in spite of our envy and our greed, in spite of our idolatries of the state, in spite of our idolatries of the market. He saw the evil in our hearts and still he came to take our evil on himself on the cross and to rise again and offer us that spiritual community in which we are one. But it's a oneness that affirms and includes our particular differences, even as we belong to one another in bonds of love. The answer to our political divides is not to look left or look right, but to look up to Jesus Christ. He's the God who descends down into our fractured world to mend it again. With him, the human family can be put back together. Without him, can you imagine the story of the two sons without there being a father? Think of the fight, think of the bus stop, think of the younger and older brothers just going at each other, hammer and tong.
Using big words here let me finish. What you're saying here. So now what happens to black America happens to you. So black people are reduced to what? Can you, Ari, can I finish my point? I didn't jump on her. Can I finish my point? Can I finish my point? Can I finish?
Time we put aside 8 minutes.
Narcissism, whether black or white, is problematic. Here's a woman incapable of arguing, therefore she articulates and overspeaks people.
Thank God there's another way.